Welcome to the MEND, a podcast for survivors and victims of crime and those who serve them, sponsored through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I am Anna Nasset, and I am your host for this bi-monthly podcast and show. And today on the show we have Vicki Garza here from the Center for Crime Victim Services to discuss their sexual assault program. This show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime. We want to acknowledge the healing process and also provide resources not only in our state of Vermont, but throughout the country that could benefit victims of crime as they begin to mend. As your host, I myself am a victim and survivor of crime, and my healing process and how I navigate the world is an ever-going and evolving process. I have used countless amounts of service providers and programs throughout my time, and it's such a joy to get to share some of the things that have worked for me and learn about things that can help others. As always, I want to begin with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics of healing, but with that in mind, we may occasionally hear a story related to crime, discuss our mental health, or have other sensitive subject matter. We urge you to listen to at your own discretion and to care for yourself. Today, as I said, we have Vicki Garza here from the Center for Crime Victim Services, the agency that sponsors this show, to discuss one of their programs and the work they are doing and how victims and providers can access assistance. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Anna. I'm very excited.
Thank you. So I would love to start by getting to know a little bit more about you. Can you share a little bit about your history, how you found yourself in the victim service field, and how you found yourself in this role and what your role is at the Center for Crime Victim Services?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do the sexual assault program at the center. And the way I ended up coming about that is I'm actually a registered nurse. So I've been a nurse for a good 25 years. And I initially lived in Florida, graduated from UVM, joined the Navy. I was a nurse in the Nurse Corps. And then I started my family, got out of the Navy, did some civilian nursing. And like many folks that find themselves in victim services, I did have victimization in my life. And that's what ended up bringing me to Vermont, where it sort of came to a head and eventually, got out of that situation. So I was still working as a nurse at that point and healing, raising my 3 girls. And eventually I started to think that I just felt like I needed to do something more or something related to helping victims. Mm-hmm. Even though you're already in the helping field as a nurse, it's just, I felt like I needed to do something different. So still practicing nursing, I happened upon the job description for the sexual assault coordinator for the Victims Compensation Program. And I thought this might be something that I'd be interested in. And it turns out I'm actually a really good fit just because I am a nurse. Mm-hmm. And you end up in this position, you end up working with the hospitals, the billing department, medical insurance, as well as the sexual assault nurse examiners. And so I have a really good rapport and understanding already. I had a base of knowledge already. So that really helped me to be able to work with all these different areas in the hospital.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's turned out to be really nice, I think.
Yeah, I think that, pretty much everyone that sat here with me, and we all have that shared experience of, we didn't come into this work easily.
Yes.
There's something that happened that led us to this work, and by matching the skills we already have and the strengths we already have with our passion, it's really incredible what you're doing. And
yeah, thank you.
I'm so glad you found that fit.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah. Can you tell us about what this program is? What is the sexual assault program at the Center for Crime Victim Services?
Sure.
What services it provides, who's eligible, how to access, just a little overview, and then we'll start to break it down more.
Okay, sure. So the sexual assault program is part of victims' compensation. So folks that are a victim of crime, they have certain resources available to them, like if they were injured during the crime, maybe payment of a medical bill, lost wages, that sort of thing. So the sexual assault program can't pay for all of the same things that victim compensation can pay for, but it's much easier to get the resources. So really the only thing to be eligible is you have to be assaulted in the state of Vermont, and then you have to report for medical care and just basically disclose that you were assaulted. And at that point, you'd be seen by a sexual assault nurse examiner, and then the paperwork would start up and come to me, and then I can make sure that the victim is not billed for any medical bills related to their care from that sexual assault.
Awesome. Does a victim have to report to law enforcement?
A victim does not have to report to law enforcement.
Okay.
So that's one of the main differences between regular victims compensation and the sexual assault program is you may report to law enforcement, and if you do, you actually would be eligible for other victims compensation resources. But if you choose not to, then you're still eligible for the sexual assault program and those medical bills from your visit, and also follow-up visits. If you have any follow-up visits related to the assault, we can also pay for a limited amount of counseling. We can pay for treatment of sexually transmitted infections, the medications, including the medications to help prevent HIV, which can be quite costly. So all of that, it's all the medical related bills to your assault that we can cover. And that really takes a big burden off of a victim.
That's a huge burden. Yeah, absolutely. How does the sexual assault, I mean, you've kind of told us how it works, but how does it work with the hospitals and healthcare to assist a victim of sexual assault? Like, how are they informed? How is a victim informed of the compensation program, and how does that communication work?
So the Center for Crime Victim Services actually funds the SANE program, which is housed at the Vermont Network.
Yep.
So they're responsible for all of the SANE nurses, training them, and so forth, all across the state in the different hospitals. So if a victim reports to a hospital, usually the emergency department, and they specify that they are a victim of sexual assault, then a victim's advocate would be called to be with them through the process, but also a sexual assault nurse examiner, which is also called a SANE. And the SANE is going to be the one that does the exam. So the victim really has the choice of how much they want to do with that visit. But the sexual assault nurse examiners are registered nurses who they have special training in forensic medical, just obtaining the evidence, obtaining the forensic medical evidence. So they offer the victim the opportunity to have a forensic exam, a sexual assault forensic exam, which can be used in the court of law. And even if the victim didn't choose to report to law enforcement at this time, that evidence will remain housed at the state lab for any future, in case they change their mind, basically.
Right.
So the sexual assault nurse examiner will let the victim know about our services.
Okay. Is the victim automatically enrolled into them?
It is. They are automatically enrolled into them. So the nurse will fill out a paperwork along with the victim. They each have a portion that they do. And it's a fairly limited amount of information because we do want sexual assault victims to have as much confidentiality as possible. So the paperwork that's filled out doesn't give specifics about the event or anything like that. It's just very basic information, name and contact, if they do have health insurance, if they have any kind of safety concern, and then that gets forwarded to me and I would open up a claim. And once the claim is opened up, then I can start working on the victim's behalf by contacting the billing department of the hospital and the insurance company if need be.
Okay.
And just sort of behind the scenes taking care of that bill so that the victim never even gets a bill and doesn't have to do anything.
Awesome.
It's taken care of for them.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking through the questions real quick. We kind of went over. I'm going to have a sane nurse on here later.
Yeah, that's good.
For another show. I'm going to just throw a question out there. For somebody who is going into the hospital for not a sexual assault, but like a domestic violence related, would they go through a different portion of the center if they wanted to go after compensation, or could you speak a little to that?
So, are you talking about if maybe it's domestic violence with sexual assault?
Without sexual
or without
assault.
sexual assault. So they would be eligible for the compensation program. And in that situation, they would need to report to law enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll also be having somebody else on from compensation. So we've got lots of subjects,
Yes.
unfortunately, but we have amazing people coming on to talk about
great,
them.
Yeah.
So my next question would be, like, do you work with insurance providers? And how do you assist victims in navigating that process? Or I guess you just kind of take over. The victim doesn't have to worry at all.
Yeah, the victim doesn't really have to do anything as long as that initial paperwork is filled out with all the essential information. Then I may not even have to contact the victim at all, and I can just sort of leave them be and let them, do their healing. Sometimes there's information missing and I might have to contact the victim, and I'll use that opportunity also to just make sure they understand the different resources that are available, such as the counseling, because they may not want it that day, but they could contact me, months or a year down the road and say, okay, I'd like to have my counseling. There's no expiration to their claim. So basically, once I get that paperwork, then I will call the billing department of the hospital and I will let them know whether they should bill the insurance or not. In Vermont, the statute does say that health insurance should be billed first and that we're the very last payer after health insurance. So that's good, but sometimes there's a situation maybe where the victim does have a safety concern or a confidentiality concern where they don't want their insurance billed. For a common scenario would be a college student who is under their parents' insurance. And if their insurance gets billed, then the parents might get that explanation of benefits in the mail, which can show that their child, went to the emergency department on this date, and I think they even have like the medical codes on them, so you could even Google the code and see.
Right.
So we don't want that to be an issue for victims. Many victims, it's fine. They tell their parents, and it's not an issue. But there are a few here and there that it would be a problem for them if insurance is billed.
Absolutely.
So that's something that the sexual assault nurse examiner will assess during the visit. And if there is a situation, a concern, then they mark it on that paperwork.
Okay.
And if the person has one of our three largest insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, MVP, or Cigna, then we have a memorandum of understanding with those insurance companies where they can create confidentiality and allow the victim to choose a different address for their paperwork to go to.
That's great.
And the nurse in the ER knows about this. So at the time of the visit, they will have the victim fill out that other piece of paperwork. And that way I get both of those pieces of paperwork. And so that would be the time when I talk to the insurance company, because I would want to verify that they had processed the paperwork and the address is now transferred to the safe address.
Okay.
Okay, and then once we find that out, then I can call the billing department and say, okay, it's all right for you to go ahead and submit the charges to insurance. So it'll go to insurance first, and then if there's any remaining patient responsibility, then they'll send the bill directly to the center, and we pay for it.
Awesome.
If the insurance cannot be protected, so maybe they have an out-of-state insurance, or it's not one of those major insurance companies, then we would just pay it as if they didn't have insurance.
Okay.
When there's a safety concern.
Yep.
When there's
Absolutely.
a safety concern. But the safety concerns, luckily, it's a pretty small amount. So usually insurance is able to pick up most of the cost, and then we can, pick up whatever is remaining for that patient.
That's great. And how is the center funded? How is this program funded?
So the sexual assault is under victims' compensation. So it's all victims' compensation funds that come from state and federal government.
Okay.
We all work out of the same pot of money.
Yep. And just for our listeners, I know a little bit about it, but how are those funds allocated federally and statewide into that compensation?
That might be a little bit out of my wheelhouse.
Okay. I know a little bit about it, but yeah.
I don't know specifics about that.
But there's a certain amount allocated to each state. Like every state has compensation.
Right. Every state has compensation.
So every state has a program like this,
Yes.
whether you're in Vermont or not, and each state is allocated through the federal government and through state government.
Right. So there's grant money, but the details of that,
it gets really confusing.
It does get very confusing.
Yeah.
And maybe one day you can have one of our grants folks on.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Because they, whenever
it's fascinating because I know sometimes it's like, if there's a huge federal lawsuit, like that settlement might go into compensation.
Yeah.
I feel like there was something with I don't remember. It was like some car company settlement that it all went into.
Maybe it was the VW.
Yes, it was Volkswagen, and this huge settlement I think went into compensation
that
across
is true.
the country, and I was like, well, that's a good way to have that go.
Yeah.
So, but it is interesting, and but it is a thing where this isn't just specific to Vermont. If you're listening,
That's
this
right.
is every state has this, so.
and also other countries have it as well.
Yep.
So if you're traveling in another country and you're a victim of crime or you're a victim of assault, then they may have resources for you. Usually if you're in another country, they do require you to report to law enforcement, so that's sort of one of the downsides about it, if you're just not at the place where you'd like to do that. And some folks are assaulted in another country or another state, and then they come to Vermont to have their exam. And so when that happens, they're technically not eligible for our compensation program. Mm-hmm. They would be eligible for the state where the assault occurred.
Yep.
But I would still get the same paperwork. The Sains and I have sort of worked out a system where they still do the Vermont paperwork, and then what I'll do is I'll work with the state where the assault occurred and try to work on making sure that that bill is getting paid.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
we don't just, drop the person and not, and leave them hanging, because all the states also have different eligibility requirements.
Yes,
So-
as I know very well. Yeah. That's a subject for a different episode, but it can be, I've had to work with different states and ultimately didn't qualify, and this
Right.
isn't from sexual assault, but this is still a victim of crime, and ultimately didn't qualify for to have my wages reimbursed because I owned my own business, so you couldn't prove loss of employment when you own your own business. And this is in a different state, but yes, so I understand very well the different states, and if you live here but the crime happened here and this and that.
And so that could be a tough thing for a victim of sexual assault, because, if somebody is maybe traveling and it happens, let's say in New Hampshire, they may just want to come home, and get their care here. And so we want to do the best we can to help facilitating making sure that bill still gets paid.
Yeah, and what I think is so great about this program versus the other compensation where you really have to do a lot of legwork, the victim does.
Yeah.
There isn't. You walk in and everything's handled for you. And that's really such a burden taken off of just one thing you don't have to think about. You're going to be served.
Yeah. Yeah, because that initial paper that they fill out in the emergency department, it has a little section that's a consent that allows me to talk to the insurance company and to talk to the billing department and to talk to the SANE, because sometimes I need, some kind of information from the SANE, like just to clarify safety concern or something like that. It doesn't allow me to see medical records. Medical records don't get sent like they might with victims' compensation. So it is as confidential as it can be. Still allowing me to be able to work on behalf of the victim, by working with the billing and insurance and so forth. So that's nice.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I've got Vicki Garza here today from the Center for Crime Victim Services talking about their sexual assault program. I know you've shared a lot about the program with us, but can you share with us what rights victims of sexual assault have as they navigate this path towards compensation, towards healing, whether to report or not? You've talked a lot about confidentiality, but maybe just a little bit more about like the victim's rights within all of this.
Sure. So first and foremost, the federal government requires that victims of sexual assault are allowed to have a forensic exam and also toxicology, because sometimes assault might have been facilitated by drugs or whatnot, at no cost to them. So Vermont goes above and beyond that. So we'll provide those things, but then we'll also provide the other things like the follow-up care of injuries, or if you need follow-up lab work, the medications, and the mental health visits. So that's kind of nice. I feel like we're sort of progressive in that way, that we're able to provide more things.
Absolutely.
There's some states that only provide that, bare minimum. So they have the right to that, and there's a sexual assault survivor's bill of rights, and that's something that the victim should be informed of when they show up, for care. The advocates can provide that with them. I think the SANE nurses, they give them a pretty good packet of information, and I'm pretty sure that that's in there. But like I said, with the medical forensic exam, they have the right to have that stored, and we store those indefinitely at the state lab at no cost to them. Also tested and notified if there's a DNA match. So the person may not have chosen to report to law enforcement, but if they find out that there's a match and that the perpetrator is already in the system for potentially another assault, then sometimes the victim might choose to report at that time. Basically, we want to make sure that victims understand that it's up to them about how much or how little they want to do, as far as their treatment, as far as talking to law enforcement. They may do an initial report and then choose not to, continue to talk to law enforcement and work with them on it, and that's okay. They have that choice. So the confidentiality part is pretty important as well. We did talk about that. I know you're going to talk to a SANE nurse, and they can talk a little bit more about how they sort of make it a little bit more confidential in the medical record, because I do think they have a means for that, but I don't know exactly the details of it. But other than that, on our end, like I said, we don't need to know the details. If somebody chooses to share the details when I'm talking to them on the phone, that's fine. But it doesn't go in my records or anything like that. It's just
they might just need to process.
They might just exactly
talk to you.
Yeah. So that's really important.
That's great. Yeah. It's obviously the victim is at the very center of this.
The victim is at the center, and they get to choose. And you'll hear that when you talk to the sexual assault nurse examiners, that it's like that all through the process of them working with the victim.
Which is so important. I mean, it's a time when you have no other control or no other voice. Like, you've just been violated. So to have even the slightest bit of control or voice through that process, I think, is the very foundational step to beginning to start to heal and to process.
It really is.
To be like, okay, I get to make a choice here.
So we don't even require that a forensic exam take place in order for the person to be eligible.
Okay.
So some states do require that because it's actually the only thing they pay for.
Right.
And because the federal government is saying this is the thing, the forensic exam and the collection of evidence is the part that is required, then some states use that as their basis. Okay, if you're choosing to have the forensic exam, then we can pay and you're eligible. But we don't hold victims to that at all. We want them to still be able to get their follow-up care and still be able to have their counseling and whatever other treatment of injuries are necessary without any cost to them. So they can also do any part of the exam they want and stop at any time.
Yep.
I don't know if you've watched the special it's on Netflix. It's called Unbelievable.
Not yet.
Okay, so
not there yet.
yeah, so it's definitely a trigger warning with that.
Yes.
And I will say, definitely the first couple episodes are tough.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. And I think there's like a total of 8 episodes. I found that to be a really good series.
Yeah, I've heard it's hugely informative. It's educational. Coming out of trial myself 2 months ago, I'm like, we're still on Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But but
No.
I've heard nothing but, I mean, anybody who's in the service field, I've just heard nothing but they're like, this is such a great show to really educate anybody, and but that it can be a little bit tough to watch.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough, but it has a pretty good example. It has good examples of how things go wrong and also how it could go right.
Yep.
How it should be, and how maybe socioeconomic class plays a part in that.
Yep, absolutely.
But the acting is very good. I found it to be and it ends up having a good ending.
Yes.
So even if it's rough at the beginning, it's
yeah, and I mean, I know it's based off a true story,
Yeah.
so I know the story. I'm
yeah.
like, I know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's why I offer a trigger warning at the beginning of the
Exactly.
show, is you never know where people are at and what they can, see or hear on any given day. And so I'll get there soon.
Yeah.
But I'll stick with Gilmore Girls for now. My go-to. So Vicki, your passion for this work is so evident, and how do you envision a future where we continue to be victim focused, as victim focused as this program is, and services, and building a culture with less violence? I mean, it's a pretty loaded question.
That is. That's a tough one.
Tell me your dreams.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Paint me a dream.
I think that those of us that are in victim services, continuing to educate ourselves, just never stop learning. And folks that come behind us, be a mentor and always be a teacher as well. Always be a teacher to those folks. But remembering that the victim is the center of it all. So we want to be victim-centered. We want to be trauma-informed. And the best way to know what we should be doing for victims is to include victims and ask them what it is they need and what is it that they want.
Yeah.
And so I think that's super important, and we all could do better at those things. We could do better at the services, even in the sexual assault program. We've hit little kinks here and there, and I've been lucky to have a great group of people at the network and the sexual assault nurses and even different billing departments at the hospitals to problem solve some of these things so that we don't end up with a snafu and causing extra stress on a victim when that doesn't need to happen. What was one of the other things I was thinking of was, as far as just the overall culture, that's a tough one. I mean, we just have to keep talking about the really tough subjects and bringing it to the forefront and educating the community as much as we can. It's gotten out there a little bit more, recently, but we just have to keep doing that. Just keep doing that. And, maybe one day there will be an ideal situation, but,
Yeah, not in our lifetime.
Not in our life.
But I think if we keep doing this work and keep focusing on, training people, like you said, mentoring, but then also focusing on our community and prevention.
Right.
and awareness, like those.
Yeah, doing a lot of outreach. Like this podcast is great because, it reaches out to the general public. And I think we try to do that too. We've had, some victims forums that we've hosted. And, even with my teaching that I do with the sexual assault nurse examiners, they learn new stuff, and I know they're sharing it with other people that don't, so all of that is really good, and we just need to keep on working on that.
Yeah, and community members who aren't in this field, who are, listening to the show or watching, it's like, even just learning from this, learning from, what you're sharing with us, they can maybe help somebody else or have awareness and assist in other areas within their own community.
Sure, because when I took this position, I did not know about a lot of this. I did not access victim services. And so I didn't really know about victims. I've learned so much.
Well, you and I met through, we took a course together, and we were both saying before we started this interview how much we learned that might not pertain to the actual nitty-gritty work that we do, but how much it's just been invaluable to learn about so many different aspects of serving victims and within our state, our town, our nation, our world, and just all the different ways that we can have our eyes open.
Yeah. And I've tried in any way that I can think of to sort of get the word out there. I have a couple of college-age daughters and then one in high school. And my daughter that goes to UVM, I asked her what sort of teaching that she got. Like, when you first move into the dorm, she said that they had like sexual assault instruction and that sort of thing. And so I was kind of curious, like, who came to talk to you? What do you know? And she didn't really know that, if she was assaulted or one of her friends was assaulted, that they could go to the emergency room and it could be confidential. Your parents don't have to know about it, that sort of thing. So I explained to her exactly like how the process works, and I told her to share it with her friends and so forth.
Yeah.
And she's actually come back to me and asked me like some more specific questions about it and how it would work. Yeah, so just anything like that.
That's great.
To get it out there.
Yeah, and then she can share that as well,
Exactly.
which is wonderful. Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
You've given us a wealth of information. And are there any main points that you feel like we left out today, or anything else that you feel like you'd like to cover or mention?
Well, I wanted to make sure I covered like the out-of-state assaults, which I think we got that. Also, just for victims to know that if you are a victim of sexual assault and you do receive a bill related to the assault, then to contact the center. It is possible that something slides by, maybe somebody, I might get the bill from that initial visit, but if they go to a follow-up visit at another facility, for example, I won't know that necessarily.
Right.
And so if the victim doesn't tell that facility, victim services is paying for this, then they won't know either. So that's okay if you forget, or if a bill comes to you and it's related to your sexual assault care, then give us a call and we can backtrack and try to figure it out.
Oh, that's great information. Yeah. Wonderful. And that's the same in any state. So good. Well, Vicki Garza, thank you so much for being here today. The work you are doing is not easy work, and I know I'm so grateful for you and all that you're doing in this state and helping all these, people that we won't ever know their names. I mean, it's very just like, and that's the work you do, is to make sure that we don't know their names and that they are served, and that's really amazing. If anybody listening would like to learn more about the sexual assault program, or other work at the Center for Crime Victim Services, please take a look at their website, cccvs.vermont.gov. I always like to close with a positive message. Is there one parting thought you could share with listeners? Just something encouraging to share with people either serving victims of crime or potential victims and survivors who are listening.
Yeah, sure. So I have something that I just use for myself, and Okay, so I'm a big fan of Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Awesome.
Okay, I just think he's an awesome guy.
He is,
And
yes.
a few years back, I heard in an interview that he was doing, he was explaining that his mother always told him whenever he saw something scary or violent or just something bad on TV or something that was happening in the world, that she told him, look for the helpers, that there are always helpers. And so I just want sexual assault victims to know, look for the helpers, police officers, nurses, victims advocates. They are out there and they want to help you.
I love that. Thank you for being one of the helpers.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Well, that does it for this week, my friends. Thank you again, Vicki, for joining us and
You're
educating us. If you have any ideas or questions about this show, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at anna@standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nasset, and I look forward to sharing with you more here on the MEND. Thank you so much. Goodbye.